A wealthy CO, Marcus Reed, strolled into his bathroom one day only to find a cleaning lady, Sophie Taylor, fast asleep on the toilet lid. And instantly, he was smitten. Before anything else, leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the tale. Sophie Taylor had reached her breaking point. After working grueling double shifts all week, scrubbing hotel rooms by day and covering the night shift for a perpetually flaky friend, she was utterly exhausted. By the time she arrived at the VIP suite, all she wanted was to wrap things up and head home. Dragging herself along like a sleep-deprived zombie with a mop in hand, she entered a bathroom so enormous it could easily rival the size of her tiny apartment. Wow, this place is like a palace. Who needs a bathroom this huge? Does it even echo? She mumbled as she poured some disinfectant into the sink and began scrubbing. Fatigue had taken over, and then, out of nowhere, as she bent over the bathtub and rested her head for a moment, her body suddenly grew heavy, just for a few seconds, and she collapsed asleep right there on the toilet seat. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed had just finished a marathon of meetings. All he craved was some quiet and a hot shower. As soon as he stepped into his suite, he slipped out of his suit and tie, loosened his shirt, and headed straight for the bathroom, thinking only of the comforting steam. Without a second glance, he swung the door open and stepped in, only to nearly have a heart attack. "What the heck?" His voice boomed around the room, shattering the silence and nearly the mirrors as well. Marcus jerked backward, his heart pounding as if attacked by a wild animal with a weapon. There, propped up on the toilet seat, was a woman in a hotel uniform snoozing peacefully in his bathroom. A shock so intense that he almost hurled his shirt at her like an exorcism. Sophie woke up in terror at the loud outburst. Startled, she lost her balance and toppled to the floor, sending the cleaning supplies crashing. "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" Marcus demanded, stepping back as if she were a ghost emerging from the drain. "Who are you and what on earth are you doing in my room?" Sophie, still groggy and disoriented, stared wide-eyed at the shirtless man before her. Tall, dark-haired, with an intense expression and undeniably handsome. In that instant, reality crashed down on her. A massive bathroom, expensive-smelling soaps, a housekeeping uniform, and now, this is the guest's room. Frozen for a moment, her eyes grew even wider as she blurted, "I didn't rob you. I swear." Marcus, still in disbelief, managed to stutter, "I just fell asleep here." That didn't sound too reassuring. Sophie flailed her arms in a feeble attempt at defense, as if to say, "I'm not a criminal. I was just cleaning," she explained awkwardly. "And you decided to take a nap in my bathroom? Or is this your new cleaning method? Snoozing on guest toilets?" she added, her voice quavering. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to keep his cool. "Look, my bathroom is practically a dorm now. It was just a quick snooze, maybe 30 minutes on the seat. It felt like only 5 minutes to me. Do you have a stopwatch in your head or something?" he teased. "I know it looks bad, but I work morning and night. My body just shut down," Sophie mumbled. Marcus took a deep breath. He really wanted to be angry, but the whole absurd situation left him disarmed. There she was, looking desperate and embarrassed, her hair a total mess, gazing at him like her life depended on it. Then, completely unexpectedly, he folded his arms and walked out toward the kitchen. Sophie scrambled after him. He paused in the kitchen, turned back with a serious look, and asked, "Do you drink coffee?" Sophie blinked. "Coffee? Yeah, I do. But what's it got to do with..." Before she could finish, Marcus grabbed a mug from the counter and handed it to her. "Try it," he said. Still dazed, Sophie took the cup and sniffed the brew. Immediately, her face scrunched up. "This is awful," she declared. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You could tell just by the smell." Sophie hesitated. "Yeah, it smells burnt. The beans are over-roasted, so it's super bitter. It looks like someone tried to mask it with sugar, but that just made it worse." Marcus's eyes twinkled with curiosity. "So you figured all that out just from the aroma?" Sophie opened her mouth to reply, then hesitated. "Wait, why are you so interested in this?" she wondered aloud. "I swear I don't normally do this," she tried to downplay it. Meanwhile, Marcus stood silently for a few seconds, studying her as if she were a complex puzzle he needed to solve. Out of the blue, he stepped back and leaned against the counter. "Perfect. You're going to help me fix this mess," he announced. "What?" Sophie blinked. "The hotel's coffee is a disaster. I've complained about it for ages, and no one does anything. If you can pinpoint what's wrong just by the smell, maybe you can figure out what's off with the rest of her dishes, too." Sophie let out a half-hearted laugh. "Oh, sure, because that's exactly what a cleaner is supposed to do, right?" she replied. "I mean, I just clean. I'm not exactly a food expert." Marcus shrugged. "Now you are." Sophie looked at him as if he had just suggested she jump out of an airplane without a parachute. "I can't just become a food critic overnight," she protested. "You don't have to," he said, pointing at the cup. "You already have." Sophie opened her mouth to argue, but then paused, unsure if he was serious. "Look, I appreciate it, but I need my job," she insisted. Marcus frowned. "And who said I was firing you?" Sophie fell silent for a moment, thinking this might be some sort of test. 1 minute she was arguing in his bathroom, and the next she was sitting at one of the hotel's swankiest restaurant tables with a spread of fancy dishes in front of her, the one she was supposed to sample. Marcus sat down across from her, arms folded, and said, "All right, taste them and tell me what you think." Sophie glanced from the plates to him. "You want me to eat all this? You work double shifts. When did you even last eat?" she asked. Sophie opened her mouth to reply, but then couldn't find the words. The silence spoke for itself. "Exactly." Finally, she picked up a fork and tried the first dish. Immediately, she wrinkled her nose. "This sauce is way too acidic. It's like they drowned it in lemon to mask a mistake," she observed. Marcus nodded, as if that confirmed his suspicions. Next, she sampled a piece of meat. "Overcooked, and the seasoning is all wrong," she commented. Then she moved on to another dish. "Is this supposed to be sweet or savory?" "It's just confusing," she added. Marcus leaned back, clearly impressed. Sophie wasn't just noticing minor errors. She was pinpointing every flaw with precision. For the first time in a long while, he was taken aback. "Okay, can I leave now?" she asked quietly. Marcus tilted his head. "Ever thought about working with food?" he inquired. Sophie laughed. "You mean like eating terrible food and calling it a job?" "No, spotting mistakes," he corrected. Sophie's laughter died down as Marcus continued. "You have a rare gift. Most people wouldn't even catch half of what you just pointed out. It might seem like a trivial skill, but it matters." Marcus studied her for a long moment, as if recalling similar remarks from others. Sophie opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I bet people have told you that before," he observed gently. Sophie stayed silent. "Well," Marcus said, standing up and rolling up his sleeves, "tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to the kitchen. I want you to test a few ingredients." Sophie's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? And don't even think about trying to run. I know where you work," she blurted, nearly toppling out of her chair. "Are you out of your mind?" Marcus chuckled. "Not yet, but give a minute." That night, Sophie couldn't shake what had just happened. Normally, she'd have been fired on the spot for being caught napping on the CEO's toilet lid, yet somehow she still had her job. And now she was roped into an odd scheme to fix the hotel's breakfast menu. It made no sense, and she wasn't even sure she wanted to be involved, but Marcus Reed wasn't the type to take no for an answer. The next morning, Sophie dragged herself into the hotel kitchen, utterly drained and terrified of doing anything that might get her fired. She swung the door open to find Marcus standing by the head chef, a burly man named Ramon. Marcus glanced at his watch, then at her. "You're late, Rita," he muttered. "If you're going to fire me, just do it now. I only got 3 hours of sleep." Marcus smirked. "You'll be fine. Now, come over here." Ramon eyed her skeptically. "So, this is the cleaning lady? What's she doing here, fixing our breakfast?" Ramon asked. "I tasted yesterday's food. If your crew were as good as you claim, we wouldn't be having this chat," Marcus replied flatly. The room grew, so silent Sophie almost wished she could vanish. Ramon crossed his arms, visibly irritated. "So, Miss Taylor, what do you think about my kitchen?" Marcus motioned at Sophie. "Why don't you tell us what you noticed? You mentioned the coffee was awful. Now, what's wrong with the other dishes?" Ramon scufa. Sophie's face heated up. "I know it sounds crazy," she admitted, "but the scrambled eggs are dry, The butter used is low quality, and the salt is all off. Ramon fronat. And the bread, she continued, it wasn't fresh at all. It either came out yesterday or was stored improperly. And the juice? I took a sip. It's a total disaster. Ramon raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with the juice? She explained. Someone mixed fresh squeeze with store-bought and added far too much sweetness. It's disappointing. Marcus bit his lip, clearly amused by her precise critique. Ramon looked like he was about to blow his top. All right, Miss Taylor, if you're so smart, what do you suggest? Sophie looked at him, then turned to Marcus. Can I be honest? Or is that too risky? Marcus chuckled. Be honest, he said. Turning back to Ramon, Sophie said, this hotel is supposed to be 5-star. Guests expect top-notch food, not something that tastes like it came from a budget cafeteria. If you really want to impress them, you need real butter, fresh bread, and farm-fresh eggs. Ramon's Jautigtanat. That costs more, and bad food drives customers away. His face turned red, while Marcus seemed to be enjoying every minute. We'll try your ideas, Sophie, he declared. Ramon looked as if he might swallow a bucket of boiling water. This is outrageous. I've been in this business for years, and this girl, fresh from cleaning, managed to point out every flaw in my dishes in less than 5 minutes. Marcus simply shrugged and turned to Sophie. Well done. Now go get some rest. Sophie left the restaurant feeling like she'd just run a marathon. Yet for the first time, she felt she'd actually done something worthwhile, even if it was just fixing the breakfast menu. Later, while folding sheets in a laundry room, Rita burst in, panting. Sophie, what's going on? People are saying you embarrassed the chef in front of Marcus. Sophie grimaced. I just told the truth, she said. And now they're whispering that you're having an affair with him, that he promoted you because you're more than just a cleaner. Sophie buried her face in her hands, thinking about disappearing under the sheets forever. But before she could, the laundry room door swung open and Ramon entered. Miss Taylor, he said hesitantly, I just want to say, I was an idiot this morning. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? He continued. You were right. We revamped the breakfast, and the guests loved it. Sophie blinked, trying to process it as Ramon extended his hand. Can I count on your opinion when we test new recipes? Sophie looked at his hand, then at Rita, who was looking more shocked than ever. With a resigned sigh, she shook Ramon's hand. As long as I don't have to scrub the dishes afterward. Ramon laughed. Deal. Somehow, Sophie had just earned a new role at the hotel, and she had no clue where this would lead. She couldn't believe that a simple housekeeping worker had managed to challenge the head chef, fix the breakfast, and survive the whole ordeal. Not only had she survived, but she'd also become someone whose opinions were listened to when it came to food. Of course, that meant rumors were flying through the hotel corridors. What started as Sophie slept on the toilet seat quickly morphed into Sophie and the CEO had a secret moment in the bathroom. And by midday, everyone was buzzing that she was having a secret affair with the boss and now had free reign in the kitchen. She tried to ignore the stares and whispers while changing linens, but nothing could silence the chatter. Then Julia, one of the receptionists, piped up, I'm officially the new bad food tester. Julia crossed her arms. No one's ever been promoted this quickly here. You must have done something really spectacular to catch Mr. Reed's eye. Sophie rolled her eyes. Do I really need to spell out? I fell asleep on his toilet seat, and instead of firing me, he made me taste awful coffee. That's the whole story. Julia arched an eyebrow. Sure, if that's all it was. Taking a deep breath, Sophie muttered, I'd love to hear your crazy theories, but I actually have a job to do. Grabbing her cleaning cart, she pushed it down the hall as Julia tried to add more commentary. All she wanted now was for Marcus to drop it and let her get back to her normal life. If only he'd forgotten his absurd idea of making her try more dishes. But Marcus Reed never forgot anything. Later that afternoon, just as Sophie was about to leave and catch a break, she received a text from Rita. Chef Ramon wants to see you in the kitchen before he tosses you into the soup pot. With a resigned sigh, she headed there. When she arrived, Ramon was waiting with arms folded, though he didn't seem ready to attack this time. Mr. Reed wants you in the restaurant now, he informed her. Sophie sighed again. He never gets tired, does he? Ramon Smirka. Well, you're still in one piece, so I guess not. Resigned, she made her way to the restaurant, where she found Marcus sitting at a table, absorbed in a menu like he was making major stock decisions. I should probably start charging for these consultations, she joked, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. Marcus looked up, grinning. Funny, I try, he said as he set aside the menu. I have a proposal for you. Sophie's eyes widened. That doesn't sound too promising. Oh, you'll like it, Marcus insisted. There's a huge food event in Paris next week, one of the biggest in the world, and I want you to come with me. Sophie stared at him, waiting for him to explain. Okay, so you want me to go with you to a fancy food event in Paris? She asked incredulously. Exactly, Marcus replied. I mean, come on. I'm a CEO, and you're just a housekeeper, right? I clean rooms and scrub toilets, and you're supposed to tell me if a dish is bad. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone serious. No, listen. You have a special talent, a refined palate that most people don't even notice. I need you to help me find the best chefs and ingredients. Sophie shook her head in disbelief. I don't even know where to start. This is insane. First, I shouldn't even be here. And second, who says I know what I'm doing? She tried to argue, but Marcus's steady conviction stopped her. Look, you're a CEO. You have a gift. I've never met anyone like you before. Sophie wasn't sure what to say. Had anyone ever believed in her? For once, someone saw her talent. She lowered her eyes. I have a job here. I make barely enough, but I'll pay you double what you make at the hotel, Marcus interrupted. Her eyes widened in surprise. That's only fair, considering you want my help. Still in shock, Sophie thought, I can't just drop everything, but when would I ever get a chance like this? I need a minute to think. Marcus nodded. Take your time, but don't wait too long. Sophie left the restaurant, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Was she really considering this? Was she crazy enough to travel with Marcus Reed? Maybe she was, but she wasn't ready to admit it. Throughout the day, as she folded linens and cleaned rooms, every mention of Marcus's name sent a shiver down her spine. Had he really made that ridiculous offer? As if she mattered to him at all? By the time her shift ended, she collapsed into her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. The trip was only 3 days away. If she said yes, she'd be boarding a plane with Marcus to an event where she'd know no one and probably feel completely out of place. But if she said no, Sophie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For years, she'd been told she wasn't good enough for anything but hard labor. No one had ever seen any talent in her. And now, Marcus Reed, the hotel CEO, was saying she was special and that he wanted her by his side to help pick the best chefs and dishes. Even if it turned out to be a mistake, for the first time, Sophie wanted to believe there was something worthwhile inside her. Before she could change her mind, she texted, Okay, I'm in. Moments later, his reply came, Great. Get ready for the trip. Sophie sighed deeply. What on earth was she doing? The day of the trip arrived faster than she expected. Sophie woke up before her alarm, packed a bag with clothes borrowed from Rita, who insisted that if you're traveling with a billionaire, you better try to look rich, and headed to the airport with sweaty palms. In the VIP lounge, Marcus was waiting, dressed impeccably as always, calm as if it were a normal day, though everything felt surreal. You're on time. That's a miracle, he said with a smirk. Sophie rolled her eyes. I thought about bolting, but my bank account made me stay. Marcus chuckled. That's the spirit. Before she could overthink, she was ushered onto a plane. But this wasn't your average flight. No cramped economy class here. Instead, she found herself on a private jet, surrounded by soft leather seats, gourmet food, and enough room to dance if she felt like it. This is way nicer than the flying buses I'm used to, she said, looking around. Marcus grinned. Good to know I'm already impressing you. Sophie slumped into her seat and sighed. You don't have to impress me, Marcus. Just promise I won't embarrass myself in Paris. You really love torturing me, don't you? He teased. The plane took off, and Sophie closed her eyes, butterflies in her stomach. She was really headed to Paris with Marcus Reed, and nothing in her life had ever felt so unreal. At the hotel, everything was like a movie set. Gold-trimmed furniture, sparkling chandeliers, luxurious carpets. So posh that Sophie was afraid to touch anything. But the night wasn't over yet. Marcus took her to an exclusive dinner before the main event. And that's when Sophie realized she was in over her head. Everyone in the room belonged to a world she'd never fit into. Women in elegant gowns and high heels. Men in tailored suits chatting in French like movie stars. Dressed in her borrowed outfit, Sophie felt like a fraud among them. Meanwhile, Marcus moved through the crowd effortlessly, greeting important guests and famous chefs, while Sophie tried her best to seem confident. Then, a middle-aged man approached with a friendly smile. "Sophie, right? Marcus mentioned you have a knack for picking up flavors." Sophie shot him a puzzled look while Marcus just smiled innocently. The man handed her a wine glass and asked, "Tell me, what year is this wine from?" Sophie stared at the glass as if it were dangerous. Marcus crossed his arms, clearly amused. "Don't look at me like that. This is part of your job now." Gritting her teeth, Sophie took a small sip. The wine was robust and full-bodied, yet she detected something different. This wine was aged in oak barrels, but it has a fruity note. "It must be a recent vintage, maybe 3 years old," she offered. The man's eyes widened. "Exactly," he said. Marcus smiled, clearly satisfied. "I knew you were onto something," he added. For a moment, Sophie felt as though the wine had revealed the secrets of the universe. Maybe being here wasn't such a bad idea after all. As the dinner went on, Sophie was introduced to more people, and with each dish she sampled, her confidence grew just a little bit more. By the end of the night, while they were heading back to the hotel, Marcus turned to her with an amused smile. "I admit you surprised me," Sophie retorted. "I surprised myself." He then paused, tilting his head. "So, you still think you don't belong in this world?" For the first time, Sophie couldn't find the words. Maybe she did belong. Maybe she'd spent too long thinking she wasn't good enough. Marcus studied her for a few seconds and then said, "You've got talent, Sophie, and I'm not letting you slip away." In that moment, she realized that this trip could change more than just her career. It could change everything. The next morning, Sophie woke up in a state that felt almost like a dream. Here she was in Paris, in a 5-star hotel, traveling with a billionaire CEO who, for some unexplainable reason, believed in her talent. Just a week ago, she would have laughed at such an idea and told anyone to get a life. Now, she lay in the comfiest bed she'd ever known, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had turned upside down so quickly. With a sigh, she got up and walked to the window, where the view of Paris, historic buildings, busy streets, and charming cafes looked straight out of a movie. A notification buzzed on her phone. "Marcus, breakfast at 8. Don't be late." Sophie rolled her eyes. "Even in Paris, he doesn't give me a break," she muttered. After a quick shower and getting dressed, she headed downstairs to meet him. Marcus was already seated at a table in the hotel restaurant, absorbed in his phone. "Do you always show up first?" he asked with a playful smirk. "Some call it punctuality, others call it efficiency." Sophie sat down and picked up the menu, grumbling, "I call it unbearable." As the waiter arrived, Marcus ordered a black coffee, while Sophie went for a croissant and hot chocolate. "You're not really a coffee drinker?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "I like coffee, but here in Paris, hot chocolate is practically an art form," she replied. Without arguing further, Marcus just watched her take her first sip, closing her eyes in contentment. "My goodness, this is amazing," she sighed. Marcus shook his head. "You really do take food seriously. You brought me here for that, didn't you?" And indeed, breakfast flowed naturally that morning. Sophie even noticed that Marcus's company felt less strange and more like home. When they finished, Marcus paid and stood up. "We've got a busy day ahead. Don't tell me I'm going to have to sample more mysterious wines," he laughed. "Today's all about food. We're meeting some of the best chefs in France." Sophie's eyes widened. "That sounds intense." "I'll survive," she scoffed, trailing along beside him. During the private wine tasting at the event, renowned chefs presented their creations for an exclusive audience. Sophie sampled dishes she'd never even imagined, refined flavors and sophisticated techniques. And to her amazement, she realized she actually knew what she was doing. She pinpointed subtle mistakes, identified hidden ingredients, and even suggested tweaks that left a few chefs visibly surprised. All the while, Marcus watched her with a mixture of pride and curiosity. As the event ended, they were walking through a bustling hall when an elegant woman approached. A tall, blonde beauty in a sleek, expensive dress with a confident smile. Sophie didn't recognize her at first, but it was clear she belonged to Marcus's world. "Marcus Reed, it's been a while," the woman said with a friendly nod. Marcus greeted her politely. "Vanessa, didn't expect to see you here. Paris is practically my second home now. And you?" Vanessa glanced at Sophie. "Looks like you've got some fresh company," she remarked, sending a shiver down Sophie's spine with her appraising gaze. Marcus interjected casually, "This is Sophie Taylor. She's working with me." Vanessa smiled, though there was a hint of disdain in her eyes. "Oh, really? And how exactly are you working with me?" Sophie felt her stomach twist, instantly knowing what Vanessa was hinting at. Marcus noticed her discomfort and placed a gentle hand on her back. "Sophie has an uncanny talent for tasting flavors. She's helping me evaluate the dishes tonight," he explained. Vanessa's eyes widened in surprise. "I could have sworn she was something entirely different." Sophie clenched her fists, aware of the implication. Marcus then said softly, "Just ignore her." Crossing his arms, he added, "You caught what she meant, right?" "Yeah," Sophie murmured. "I guess that's why I feel out of place." Marcus's tone softened. "You're here because you're good. Don't worry about what others think." Sophie sighed. "Easy for you to say, Marcus. You're a billionaire. You know the game." Despite her protest, a part of her wanted to believe him. Later that evening, while alone at the hotel bar, Sophie spotted Vanessa chatting closely with Marcus. It stung. Even though she tried not to care, watching Vanessa casually touch his arm made Sophie's heart ache. Not wanting to dwell on it, she left the bar and returned to her room, sitting on the bed, trying to convince herself it was nothing. But deep down, she realized she was beginning to feel something for Marcus Reed, a thought that scared her more than she expected. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory of Vanessa's touch and Marcus's easy smile haunted her. Was she just a pawn in someone else's game? Feeling like an extra in a movie starring rich, sophisticated people, Sophie wondered if she was just waiting for someone to boot her out. When morning finally came, Sophie made a decision. She grabbed her phone and texted Marcus, "I think I should head home. Thanks for the opportunity, but I don't belong in this world." She stared at the message before hitting send. Almost immediately, Marcus replied, "Just wait. Meet me at the restaurant in 10 minutes. Sophie sighed, dressed reluctantly, and headed down. There, she found Marcus sitting with a gloomy expression. "Good morning," she greeted. "You think you could just text me and bolt?" Marcus countered, "I'm not running. I'm being realistic." "Realistic?" "Look, Marcus, I appreciate everything, but it just doesn't feel right for me to stay," she said. He paused, then tilted his head. "Is this about Vanessa?" Sophie's stomach dropped. "No, of course not," she stammered. Marcus smirked. "You disappeared right after you saw us talking." "I was just tired, Sophie. You're not very good at covering up, are you?" She tried to shrug it off while buttering a piece of bread. "It's not that. I just think accepting this trip was a mistake." "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm not like you, Marcus. I'm not sophisticated. I don't speak French. I don't know how to behave at these events." Marcus rubbed his face. "So you want to quit because a few snobby people can't handle your talent?" "I'm not more talented than anyone else." "You are," she replied softly. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I didn't bring you here for nothing. I don't waste my time on people who have no value." Her heart pounded as she considered his words. Then, he slid a card onto the table. "You have until noon to decide if you want to stay. There's a flight back home reserved for you. But if you want to continue, meet me in the main hall at 3 p.m. Sophie stared at the card and then at him. Marcus watched her a moment before leaving. Taking a deep breath, she realized that staying meant facing a world that clearly didn't accept her, while leaving would be admitting she was running away, a notion Sophie had never entertained. When the clock struck 3, she stood in the main hall. Marcus didn't smile when he saw her. but his expression held a quiet satisfaction. "Good. Now stop acting like you don't belong and come with me," he said. And for the first time since arriving, Sophie decided to give it a try. That afternoon, at one of the key events of the food conference, Marcus had meetings with investors while Sophie attended a panel on emerging culinary talent. Determined to soak everything in, she listened intently, taking mental notes on what made a dish truly memorable. Yet, while she was focused, she overheard two women whispering, "Did you see that girl with Marcus Reed? They say he picked up a cleaning lady and brought her to Paris." Sophie's cheeks flushed. "Maybe it's just a whim, or maybe he really sees something in her," one whispered. The women laughed. Sophie closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and then turned around with a warm smile. "Thanks for caring so much about my life, but I've got to get back to the panel. I'm here to work after all." The women were left speechless, and Sophie felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't about to let petty gossip get to her. At the end of the panel, Marcus met her and asked, "So what changed?" Sophie smiled. "I finally realized I'm good at this." Marcus smirked. "Finally," he replied. In that moment, she felt light. She was there not because Marcus chose her, but because she chose to be there, and that changed everything. Never before had she felt so at home among people who once seemed completely out of her league. Sure, people still whispered when she passed by, and some still regarded her as an outsider, but now Sophie didn't care. In fact, it seemed to irritate those who doubted her even more. That night, Marcus organized a dinner at one of Paris's most exclusive restaurants. The setting was elegant, the food exquisite, and the wine flowed generously. Sophie tried to follow the sophisticated conversations, but soon realized she didn't need to force herself to fit in. She could already identify the ingredients in each dish and understand the technical nuances of the preparations, and Marcus clearly recognized her talent. "You seem more confident," he commented after the waiter served dessert. "Do I look more confident? Or am I finally?" Marcus smiled as she picked up her fork. "You just look satisfied," he said, leaning closer. "I knew you were amazing. I was waiting for you to see it too." Sophie felt warmth rise in her cheeks, though she quickly sipped her wine to hide it. The dinner went on normally until Vanessa reappeared. As usual, she looked like she'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Flawless, confident, and a little frosty. Vanessa sat down sharply next to Sophie and shot her a pointed look. "Darling, what a surprise to see you here," she said. Sophie replied coolly, "I'm not a surprise anymore. I'm starting to belong." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Really? Is that what you think?" Marcus interrupted. "Vanessa, what brings you here?" She took a glass of wine, swirled it thoughtfully, and then, with a slight edge, said, "You know, this world is a game. No matter how many challenges you throw at yourself, some things just don't fit." Sophie noticed the subtle glance Vanessa shot her, and Marcus remained calm. "I'm tired of your games, Vanessa. If you have something to say, just say it," he said firmly. Vanessa leaned in. "Have you ever considered that bringing a housekeeper to Paris and parading her as some sort of expert might hurt your image? Not everyone is thrilled about it." Sophie's blood boiled, but before she could respond, Marcus interjected, "Who cares what they say?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "Deep down you care too. You wouldn't have reached where you are without knowing the game." Marcus fixed her with a look and said, "I've always believed the game is about talent, and Sophie has that in spades." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Do you really think that's enough?" Sophie, gathering her courage, finally spoke up. "Vanessa, what exactly bothers you? Is it that I'm here, or that you can't knock me down?" A heavy silence followed. Vanessa's expression hardened briefly before she recovered with a forced smile. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" "I am smart, and you know it." Marcus watched the exchange with mild amusement. Vanessa then sighed. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." She stood, adjusted her dress, and walked out without a backward glance. Sophie exhaled deeply. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Marcus reached across the table and asked, "Are you okay?" She smiled softly. "Yes, because I know that no matter what happens, we'll face it together." He squeezed her hand lightly, and in that moment, Sophie felt invincible. The final day in Paris zipped by. Sophie and Marcus attended more events, met new people, and gradually, she was no longer seen as an outsider. People began to respect her. On the last evening, Marcus took her to dinner at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. The ambience was elegant, the cuisine flawless, but Sophie found herself more focused on Marcus than on the food. "What do we do when we get back?" she asked. Marcus held his wine glass, looking into her eyes. "Do you want to return to the hotel?" he inquired. Sophie hesitated. She'd always worked hard to carve out her own space, but now everything had changed. "I love what I do, but I'm ready for something new," she admitted. Marcus smiled. "I have a proposal." Her curiosity piqued. He set his glass down, took her hand, and said, "Join me, not as a hotel employee, but as my partner. You've got talent, Sophie. We can build something amazing together." Her heart raced. "Are you serious?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She took a deep breath and, looking into his eyes, replied, "I accept." Marcus grinned. "Great choice." They toasted, and that night, Sophie knew her life would never be the same. After landing back in the city, Sophie stepped off the private jet into a reality that now felt entirely different. As they climbed into the car, Marcus took her hand. "Are you ready to start this new chapter?" he asked. With a smile, she said, "I've never been more ready for anything." He pulled her close and kissed her deeply. And in that kiss, Sophie realized her destiny wasn't about cleaning hotel rooms. It was about being with Marcus. Sophie had never imagined that her life would take such a dramatic turn, from scrubbing floors to becoming a connoisseur in the culinary world alongside one of the most influential men in the industry, and most unexpectedly, falling in love along the way. Over the past few months, her relationship with Marcus had grown stronger as they worked together, traveled to international events, and launched an innovative project for the hotel chain. But above all, they had each other, and that was what truly mattered. One day, Marcus organized a press conference at the hotel. As Sophie walked into a room filled with flashing cameras and reporters, she felt a surge of fear. Yet there was Marcus, calm, unflinching on stage. Gripping the microphone, he began, "I know many of you are here because of the rumors about Marcus Reed and Sophie Taylor, so let me set the record straight." The room fell silent as Marcus continued. "Sophie wasn't promoted because of some affair with me. She earned her position with undeniable talent, proving time and again that she deserves to be here." Sophie's throat tightened as Marcus added, "And for anyone who thinks this is scandalous, I couldn't care less. I chose her, and I'm not apologizing for that." Overwhelmed with emotion, Sophie felt tears well up as Marcus concluded. When the conference ended, he approached her. "What did you think?" he asked. Sophie laughed. "You're completely crazy." He cupped her face and replied firmly, "Always." Ignoring the flashing cameras, she kissed him, knowing that, finally, she belonged. No one could take that away from her. Just weeks ago, she'd been a lowly cleaner struggling to pay the bills. Now, she was in Paris in Marcus Reed's arms, making headlines as the woman who captured the heart of a billionaire CEO. What once seemed like a distant dream was now her reality, and she had no regrets. In the days that followed, Sophie's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from Rita, hotel staff, and even strangers. Some congratulated her, others hurled insults, calling her an opportunist who just got lucky. But none of that mattered because, for the first time, she no longer felt alone. At breakfast, Marcus sat at their usual table, but today he looked noticeably more relaxed. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. Sophie sipped her coffee and smiled, better than before. "I bet your name's all over the newspapers." She rolled her eyes as he teased. "I did that press conference for you." Sophie laughed. "You always make things more complicated, don't you?" Marcus grinned, "Always." Yet, her smile faltered when she noticed a familiar figure enter the restaurant. Vanessa, the elegant blonde, who now wore a much colder expression. She walked right over and stopped beside Marcus. "Can we talk?" Vanessa asked curtly. Marcus took a sip of coffee and raised an eyebrow. "If this is another one of your speeches, I'm not interested." Vanessa forced a smile. "It's not a speech. I just need to clear a few things up." Crossing her arms, Sophie interjected. "Now you want to talk after trying to ruin my reputation in public, Vanessa?" Sophie, understand. What I did wasn't personal, Vanessa replied. Sophie let out an incredulous laugh. Oh, really? So spreading inconvenient truths about me is just a minor detail? Vanessa pressed her lips together. They weren't lies, she insisted. They were truths that some people couldn't handle. Marcus leaned back. Vanessa, if you have something to say, just say it. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa looked directly at Sophie. You've changed the game. This world doesn't take kindly to change, and even though you won this round, there will always be people trying to drag you down. Sophie met her gaze steadily. So, you're telling me to be careful? Vanessa nodded. And to brace yourself. This is only the beginning. Marcus stood up, his tone firm and resolute. Sophie, you don't need to worry. You're not alone. Vanessa stared at him a moment longer before stepping away. Good luck to both of you, she said, and then left. Sophie exhaled deeply, and Marcus reached across the table. Are you okay? She smiled softly. Yes, because I know we'll face whatever comes together. He squeezed her hand, and in that moment, Sophie believed nothing could break them. The final day in Paris passed in a whirlwind. Sophie and Marcus attended more events, met even more people, and gradually, the outsider label faded. People began to respect her. On their last night, Marcus took her to dinner at an ultra-exclusive restaurant. The setting was elegant, the food flawless, but Sophie found herself focusing more on Marcus than on the meal. What do we do when we go back? She asked. Marcus looked into her eyes. Do you want to return to the hotel? She hesitated. I love my work, but I think I'm ready for something different now. Marcus smiled. I have a proposition. Curious. She listened as he set his wine glass down and took her hand. Join me. Not as a hotel employee, but as my partner. You've got incredible talent, Sophie, and together we can create something amazing. Her heart pounded. Are you serious? I never say something unless I mean it. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze. I accept. Marcus grinned. Great choice. They toasted. In that night, Sophie knew her life would be forever changed. When the private jet landed back in the city, Sophie stepped off into a transformed reality. In the car, Marcus took her hand and asked, Are you ready for this new chapter? Smiling, she replied, I've never been more ready for anything. He pulled her into a passionate kiss, and in that moment, she realized her destiny wasn't about cleaning hotel rooms. It was about building a future with Marcus. Sophie never imagined her life would pivot so drastically, from scrubbing floors to becoming a respected culinary connoisseur alongside one of the industry's most influential men, and, most unexpectedly, falling deeply in love along the way. Over the past few months, her relationship with Marcus had blossomed as they worked together, traveled internationally, and launched innovative projects for the hotel empire. But above all, they had each other, and that was all that truly mattered. One day, Marcus called a press conference at the hotel. As Sophie entered the room, she was met by a flurry of flashing cameras and reporters, an overwhelming sight that made her heart pound. But then, she saw Marcus on stage, calm and unwavering. Gripping the microphone, he announced, I know many of you are here because of the rumors swirling about Marcus Reed and Sophie Taylor. Let me set the record straight. The room fell silent. Sophie wasn't given her promotion because of some secret romance with me, he continued. She earned it through her undeniable talent and hard work. Sophie felt a lump in her throat as Marcus added, and for anyone who thinks this is scandalous, I couldn't care less. I chose her, and I stand by that decision. Overcome with emotion, Sophie realized in that moment that nothing, no matter what the media said, could tear them apart. When the press conference ended, Marcus approached her. What do you think? He asked. Sophie laughed. You're completely insane. He gently cupped her face and said, always. Ignoring the flashing cameras, they kissed, and in that kiss, Sophie felt she belonged. No one could steal that away. Just weeks ago, she'd been a lowly cleaner barely making ends meet. Now she was in Paris, wrapped in Marcus Reed's arms, making headlines as the woman who captured the heart of a billionaire. What once had seemed like a far-off dream was now her reality, and she had no regrets. A few weeks later, Sophie woke up in her hotel room to a barrage of messages from Rita, hotel staff, even strangers. Some congratulated her, others were harsh, calling her an opportunist who'd just gotten lucky. But none of that mattered because for the first time, she didn't feel alone. At breakfast, Marcus was waiting at their usual table, yet he seemed more relaxed than ever. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. Sophie sipped her coffee and smiled. "Better than I have in days. I bet your name is splashed all over the papers by now." She rolled her eyes as he teased. "I did that press conference for you." She laughed. "You always make things more complicated, don't you?" Marcus grinned. "Always." However, her smile dimmed when she noticed a familiar face entering the restaurant. Vanessa, looking as flawless as ever, but with an icy stare. She strode over and stopped beside Marcus. "Can we talk?" Vanessa said curtly. Marcus took a sip of coffee and raised an eyebrow. "If this is another one of your speeches, I'm not interested." Vanessa forced a smile. "It's not a speech. I just want to clear a few things up." Sophie crossed her arms. "Now you want to talk after trying to ruin my reputation in public, Vanessa?" "Sophie, listen. What I did wasn't personal," Vanessa replied. Sophie laughed incredulously. "Oh, really? So broadcasting inconvenient truths about me is just a minor detail." Vanessa pressed her lips together. "They're not lies. They're inconvenient truths." Marcus leaned back. "Vanessa, if you have something to say, just say it." Taking a deep breath, Vanessa looked directly at Sophie. "You've shaken up the rules here. This world isn't kind to change, and even though you've won this round, there will always be people out to knock you down." Sophie met her steady gaze. "So, you're telling me to be cautious?" Vanessa nodded. "And to brace yourself. The worst is yet to come." Marcus stood, his tone firm. "Sophie, you don't have to worry about a thing. You're not alone." Vanessa stared at him a moment longer before stepping away. "Good luck to both of you," she said, then walked out. Sophie exhaled deeply, and Marcus reached across the table. "Are you okay?" She smiled softly. "Yes, because I know we'll face everything together." He squeezed her hand, and in that moment, she believed nothing could stop them. The final day in Paris flew by in a blur. Sophie and Marcus attended more events, met more people, and gradually, she was no longer seen as an outsider. People began to recognize and respect her. On the last evening, Marcus took her to dinner at one of the city's most exclusive spots. The ambience was elegant, the food impeccable, but Sophie found herself more intrigued by Marcus than the meal. "What happens when we get home?" she asked. Marcus paused, looking into her eyes. "Do you want to come back to the hotel?" he asked softly. Sophie hesitated. She had worked so hard to create her own space, yet everything had changed. "I love what I do, but I think I'm ready for something new," she admitted. Marcus smiled warmly. "I have a proposal for you." She raised an eyebrow as he continued. "Join me, not as a hotel employee, but as my partner. You have incredible talent, Sophie, and together, we can build something amazing." Her heart pounded. "Are you serious?" "I never say something unless I mean it," she said. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze and replied, "I accept." Marcus grinned. "Great choice." They toasted, and that night, Sophie knew her life would never be the same. After their flight back, as Sophie stepped off the private jet, everything felt different. In the car, Marcus took her hand. "Are you ready to start this new chapter?" he asked. Smiling, she said, "I've never been more ready for anything." He pulled her close, and in a deep, passionate kiss, Sophie realized that her destiny wasn't about cleaning rooms. It was about sharing her future with Marcus. Sophie never expected her life to change so drastically. From scrubbing floors to becoming a respected voice in the culinary world alongside one of the most powerful men in the business, and most unexpectedly, falling in love. Over the past few months, her bond with Marcus had only grown stronger as they worked together, traveled abroad, and launched innovative projects for the hotel chain. But above all, they had each other, and that was everything. Then, Marcus announced a press conference at the hotel. When Sophie entered the room, she was met with a sea of flashing cameras and reporters. Her heart pounded as she saw Marcus standing on stage, calm and steady. He grabbed the mic and began, "I know many of you are here because of the rumors about Marcus Reed and Sophie Taylor. Let me make one thing clear. The room went silent as he continued. Sophie wasn't promoted because of a fling with me. She earned every bit of her position through hard work and undeniable talent. Sophie's throat tightened as he added, and for anyone who thinks this is scandal, frankly, I don't care. I chose her, and I'm proud of that decision. Overwhelmed, Sophie felt tears prick her eyes as Marcus finished his speech. After the press conference, he approached her. "What did you think?" he asked. Sophie laughed softly. "You're completely nuts." He gently cupped her face and said, "Always." Ignoring the flashing cameras, they kissed, and in that moment, Sophie knew she belonged. No one could take that away from her. Just weeks ago, she had been a mere cleaner struggling to pay her bills. Now, she was in Paris, wrapped in Marcus Reed's arms, making headlines as the woman who stole a billionaire CEO's heart. What once was a distant dream had become her reality, and she had no regrets. 2 weeks later, as Sophie lay in bed staring at a pregnancy test, she blinked at the 2 lines appearing before her. Her heart raced. "Oh my gosh, I'm pregnant." A mix of shock and joy overwhelmed her. She and Marcus were going to have a baby. Just then, the bedroom door creaked open and Marcus walked in. "Sophie, you need to see this." "I got an invite too," he said, but stopped when he saw her expression. Frowning, he asked, "What's wrong?" Sophie took a deep breath, then showed him the test. Marcus stared at it, blinking in disbelief. "Is this really?" he managed. Sophie smiled softly, "Yes." For a moment, he just stood there before stepping forward, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her with overwhelming emotion. When he pulled away, tears glistened in his eyes. "We're having a baby," he whispered. Sophie laughed, happiness bubbling over. "We really are." Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I love you," he murmured. "I love you too," she replied, resting her head against his chest. In that moment, Sophie knew this was just the beginning of a whole new adventure, a new phase of love, growth, and happiness. It wasn't just about her and Marcus anymore. They were now a family. What do you think of Sophie and Marcus's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments on a scale of 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional tales by clicking here on the final screen.